The message came while I was standing in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. "You're not invited to the wedding. Goodbye, loser." That was it. No explanation. No argument. No chance to respond. I stared at the screen, waiting for my phone to buzz again, hoping stupidly that it was a mistake. A follow-up, a joke taken too far, but nothing came. Behind me, I felt a presence. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. My father stood there, silent, close enough to see the message reflected in the glass of my phone. He didn't ask me what I had done. He didn't tell me to calm down. He didn't defend my sister. He just kept reading the words on the screen, his jaw tightening, his breath slowing. In that moment, I realized something was about to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I was 32 years old, standing in my own kitchen, holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than it should. The message from my sister didn't arrive during an argument or after some dramatic fallout. It came quietly, almost casually, like an afterthought. "You're not invited to the wedding. Goodbye, loser." I read it again, and then again. There was no anger in me at first, just confusion. Weddings were supposed to be about family, even broken families, even complicated ones. I had never imagined being erased so cleanly, with one sentence, by someone who shared my blood. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I just stood there, frozen, as if moving might make it real. That's when my father walked into the kitchen. He had come by to drop off some old paperwork he'd found in his car. He was still holding the envelope when he noticed my face. Pale, still, wrong. "What happened?" he asked. I didn't answer. I simply turned the phone around and placed it on the counter between us. He leaned forward slightly, reading the message once, then a second time. The room felt smaller as he straightened up. My father had always been a quiet man. Not weak, just controlled. He believed that families survived by swallowing discomfort, by avoiding conflict, by keeping the peace at all costs. But as he looked at that message, something in his expression shifted. Not rage. Not shock. Recognition. For years, he had watched me stay silent while my sister took center stage. Watched me adjust, compromise, step aside. And for years, he had told himself that this was just how siblings were. But this message made it impossible to pretend anymore. "My name is Claire Whitmore." And that text message was the moment my father finally saw what I had been living with my entire life. Growing up, my sister was always the one people noticed first. She was louder, prettier, more confident. The kind of girl teachers remembered and neighbors bragged about. When she walked into a room, conversations shifted toward her without effort. When she spoke, people listened. I learned early that I was the other one. Not the problem child, not the disappointment either. Just the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need much attention, so she rarely got any. My parents never said it out loud, but it showed in 100 small ways. My sister's mistakes were brushed off as just her personality. Mine were lessons I was expected to learn from quickly. When she needed help, everyone rushed in. When I struggled, I was praised for being strong enough to handle it. So I did. I adjusted. I stayed quiet. I learned how to make myself useful instead of visible. When our mother got sick, it was me who rearranged my schedule. When bills piled up, it was me who skipped weekends away to help cover groceries. When family tensions rose, I became the peacekeeper, the one who softened conversations, smoothed over arguments, reminded everyone that she didn't mean it like that. I told myself it was fine. I told myself love didn't need applause. My sister, on the other hand, moved through life like the world was built to catch her. New jobs, new friends, new dreams that everyone was expected to support. Even when she hurt people, it was forgiven quickly, because she was just stressed or going through a lot. I learned not to expect apologies. By the time we were adults, our roles were already set. She was the one whose milestones mattered. Promotions, engagements, big announcements at family dinners. I was the one who showed up early, stayed late, and cleaned up after everyone left. And I didn't resent her for it. Not really. What I resented, though I didn't have the words for it back then, was how invisible I had become by trying so hard not to be a burden. I had my own life, my own job, my own apartment. I paid my bills. I kept my promises. But somehow, in my own family, I existed only in the background, like furniture that had always been there and would always be there. So when my sister got engaged, I congratulated her. I sent flowers. I listened to her talk about venues, dresses, guest lists. I assumed naively that being excluded was something that happened to distant relatives or old friends, not sisters. I never imagined that one day I would be erased completely, not by silence, but by a sentence typed without hesitation. And yet, looking back, the message didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the first time my sister said out loud what the rest of the family had quietly allowed for years: that I was optional. My sister's wedding was never just a wedding. It was an event. A statement. Proof that she had made it. From the moment she announced her engagement, everything revolved around it. Phone calls buzzed constantly, family group chats filled with photos of venues, color palettes, floral arrangements. Every detail was discussed, analyzed, and admired. I watched it all from the edges. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I wasn't invited into the planning. No one asked my opinion. No one needed my help. I was copied on messages the way you copy a distant relative out of politeness, not inclusion. Still, I told myself that was normal. Weddings were stressful. People got tunnel vision. I didn't want to be another voice demanding space. So I stayed quiet. I sent a congratulatory message the night she announced the date. I mailed a thoughtful engagement gift. When she talked about the dress, I listened. When she complained about guest lists and budgets, I nodded sympathetically. At no point did it occur to me that I wouldn't be there. I assumed my invitation was a formality, something that would arrive later, once the chaos settled. After all, we were sisters. We shared a childhood, a last name, a history no seating chart could erase. Or so I thought. As the wedding got closer, small things began to feel off. My parents discussed travel plans in front of me, without mentioning my schedule. My aunt asked which hotel I was staying at, then paused awkwardly when I didn't have an answer. Conversations shifted when I entered the room, as if everyone else already knew something I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then one afternoon, while sitting at my kitchen table, I saw a photo my sister posted online, a screenshot of her finalized guest list, carefully blurred except for the heading, "Confirmed attendees." Names filled the page. Friends, coworkers, distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. My name wasn't there. I stared at the image longer than I care to admit, scanning it again and again, convinced I must have missed it. That maybe it was hidden somewhere below the fold. That surely my sister wouldn't exclude me publicly like that. But the truth settled in slowly, like cold air seeping through a crack. I wasn't invited. Not forgotten. Not overlooked. Deliberately excluded. When I finally confronted her, not angrily, not accusingly, her response was quick and rehearsed. "It's not personal," she said. "We're keeping things very curated, very specific. Curated." As if family were decor. As if I didn't fit the image she wanted projected on one of the most photographed days of her life. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't ask what I had done wrong, because deep down I already knew the answer. I reminded her of something she didn't want to acknowledge. The parts of her life that weren't polished. The years when she leaned on others. The sibling who had stayed behind to hold things together while she moved forward. And that didn't match the story she wanted to tell. So, I stepped back. I sent a wedding gift anyway. A generous one. I wrote a card wishing her happiness, success, love. All the things you're supposed to want for someone you care about, even when they've made it clear you don't belong in their future. What hurt most wasn't missing the ceremony. It was realizing that my absence wasn't a side effect of planning. It was the plan. And somewhere between the color schemes and seating arrangements, my sister had decided that erasing me was easier than explaining me. My father didn't react the way I expected. After he read the message on my phone, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace the kitchen or curse under his breath. He didn't even look at me right away. He stood there quietly, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Later, I realized he was replaying years of memories in his head, memories that suddenly made sense. That evening, he stayed longer than usual. We sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where he used to help me with homework when I was a kid. He didn't ask me to explain. He didn't need details. He just said, "Tell me how long this has been happening." I hesitated, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't know where to begin. So, I started small. I told him about the group chats I was copied on but never included in. The planning conversations that happened around me, not with me. The way my name disappeared from lists and reappeared only when something needed to be done quietly, without recognition. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Then I told him about the guest list photo. About seeing strangers and distant relatives welcomed into a moment I had assumed I was part of by default. About how exclusion doesn't always announce itself, it often shows up dressed as logistics, as nothing personal. That's when his eyes changed. My father had always believed he treated us equally. He prided himself on fairness, on being the calm center of the family. But as I spoke, something cracked in that certainty. He began to remember things he had brushed aside for years. The birthdays where my sister's wishes determined the plans. The holidays where I adjusted my schedule while others were accommodated. The countless times he had praised me for being easy, never questioning why I had learned to be that way. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall as if it were a window into the past. "I thought you didn't mind," he said quietly. That sentence landed harder than any insult my sister had ever thrown at me. Because he wasn't wrong. I hadn't minded at least, I hadn't complained. I had mistaken silence for strength, adaptability for maturity, and he had mistaken my endurance for consent. He rubbed his temples, a habit he had when something weighed on him. "I thought keeping the peace meant everyone was okay," he said. "I didn't see who was paying the price." That night, he didn't sleep much. I know because he called me early the next morning, his voice steadier but different, like someone who had crossed an invisible line. "I keep thinking about when you were little," he said. "You never asked for much. You always waited your turn. I told myself that meant you were fine." He paused. "I see now that it meant you learned how to disappear." For the first time in my adult life, my father didn't defend my sister. He didn't excuse her behavior as stress or ambition or wedding pressure. He didn't suggest I reach out first or be the bigger person. Instead, he asked a question that stunned me. "Do you feel like part of this family anymore?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth scared me. I loved my family. I always had. But love, I was beginning to understand, wasn't supposed to feel like constant negotiation. It wasn't supposed to require shrinking yourself to stay included. "I don't know," I finally said. My father exhaled slowly. "Then that's on me," he replied, "and I need to fix what I helped ignore." In that moment, I saw something shift inside him, not anger, not guilt, but clarity. The kind that doesn't shout or demand attention. The kind that leads to decisions made quietly, without seeking approval. I didn't know what he was going to do, but I knew, for the first time, that he had truly seen me. And once someone sees the truth, they can't unsee it. My father didn't announce his decision. There was no dramatic phone call, no confrontation, no family meeting where voices were raised and feelings spilled everywhere. If I had learned how to disappear quietly, he had learned how to decide the same way. In the days that followed our conversation, he moved with a calm that felt unfamiliar. He went to work. He ran errands. He answered messages with his usual politeness. From the outside, nothing had changed. But I noticed the details. He stopped talking about the wedding altogether. When relatives mentioned travel plans or outfits, he didn't engage. He listened, nodded, and changed the subject. When my sister called, he kept the conversation short, cordial, distant. One afternoon, I finally asked him what he was going to do. He didn't answer right away. We were sitting on my couch, the late light slanting through the window. He stared at his hands for a long moment, as if weighing something carefully. "I'm not going to argue with her," he said at last. "And I'm not going to explain myself." That surprised me. Part of me had expected anger, something loud enough to match the hurt, but what I heard instead was resolve. "I've spent my whole life trying to keep everyone comfortable," he continued. I thought that was my job. But comfort that's built on one person swallowing everything. That's not peace. That's imbalance. I waited, afraid to interrupt. If one of my children is treated as optional, he said, his voice steady, then my presence becomes optional too. He didn't say my sister's name. He didn't need to. There was no bitterness in his tone, just certainty, the kind that doesn't ask permission. That evening, he sent a short message to my sister. Not accusatory, not emotional, just a few sentences, written carefully. He didn't show it to me, but later he told me what it said. He told her he loved her. He told her he hoped her wedding day was everything she wanted. And then he told her that he wouldn't be attending. No explanations. No ultimatums. No conditions. Just a boundary. When I heard that, my first instinct was to protest. I didn't want to be the reason he missed such an important moment. I didn't want to become the silent wedge driving our family further apart. But he shook his head before I could speak. This isn't about choosing sides, he said. It's about refusing to stand where harm is being normalized. That sentence stayed with me. For the first time, someone wasn't asking me to endure quietly for the sake of harmony. Someone wasn't asking me to be understanding, patient, forgiving, invisible. My father had made a decision not fueled by anger, but by alignment. He wasn't trying to punish my sister. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was simply choosing not to participate in something that required one of his children to be erased. I didn't know how my sister would react. I didn't know what consequences would follow. But I knew something had shifted permanently, not because anyone raised their voice, but because someone finally decided that silence would no longer come at my expense. My sister believed she was in control. She believed the guest list was hers alone to shape, that the invitations, the seating, the presence or absence of certain people were simply details she could arrange to fit the version of her life she wanted to present. What she never realized was how much of that carefully constructed picture rested on quiet support she had stopped noticing years ago. My father never talked about the role he played. He never listed the things he handled behind the scenes, never reminded anyone of what he contributed. That wasn't his nature. He believed that real support didn't need applause. But once he stepped back, the structure he had quietly held together began to show its seams. He was the one who had put his name on the initial venue deposit years earlier, when my sister had first started talking about someday. He was the one who had vouched for her with vendors who trusted his word more than contracts. The one who had smoothed over delays, negotiated extensions, reassured people when plans shifted and deadlines slipped. Not because she asked, because he was her father. When he decided not to attend the wedding, he didn't call anyone to cancel things. He didn't pull funds dramatically or demand recognition. He simply removed himself from the process. Quietly. Completely. Within days, things started to unravel. A vendor called my sister asking to reconfirm arrangements my father had always handled. A payment deadline she assumed was flexible suddenly wasn't. A location she believed was secured required additional documentation tied to my father's involvement. Confusion followed, then panic. My sister called him repeatedly. Left messages. Texted questions that grew sharper with every unanswered hour. At first, she assumed there had been a mistake. Then she assumed there had been a misunderstanding. Finally, she assumed there had been betrayal. But my father didn't argue any of it. When he finally returned her call, his voice was calm, almost gentle. He told her he hadn't taken anything away. He had simply stopped carrying what was never meant to be his alone. That was the part she never understood. She thought exclusion was harmless, that erasing me from her wedding wouldn't ripple outward, that families could be edited the same way social media posts were crop out what didn't fit, highlight what did. She didn't realize that by cutting me out so cleanly, she had forced my father to see the whole picture clearly for the first time. And once he saw it, he couldn't pretend anymore. He didn't tell her this was punishment. He didn't accuse her of cruelty. He didn't ask her to apologize. He simply said, I can't stand in a place where one of my children is treated as if they don't belong. To her, it felt sudden, unfair, even cruel. To him, it was the natural result of a truth that had been ignored for too long. She had believed the wedding was hers to control. What she never knew was that the quiet foundation beneath it had already shifted. Not out of revenge, but out of recognition. And once recognition replaces denial, nothing can be held together by silence anymore. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in fragments, missed calls, clipped messages, sudden urgency where there had once been confidence. At first, my sister assumed everything could be fixed with a few phone calls. She had always believed problems existed, only until someone else stepped in to solve them. This time, no one did. Her calls to my father grew more frantic. When he didn't answer, she left voicemails, not apologies, not questions about me, just frustration, wrapped in disbelief. "Dad, I don't understand why you're doing this. This is my wedding. You're putting me in an impossible position. It's climbs knows very for." When he finally agreed to meet her, he didn't choose a dramatic setting. No restaurant, no family gathering, just his quiet living room, the same place where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays for decades. I wasn't there. He told me later that it was important this conversation not become a performance. My sister arrived tense, already defensive. She spoke first, words spilling out fast, as if speed could substitute for reflection. She talked about contracts, about expectations, about embarrassment, about how people would talk if things went wrong. She framed everything as a crisis created by his absence. At no point did she mention me. My father let her speak without interruption. He had done that my whole life, listened carefully, patiently, believing that understanding came before judgment. But this time, when she finally stopped to catch her breath, he didn't rush to reassure her. Instead, he asked one question. "Why wasn't your sister invited?" The room went quiet. My sister laughed softly, as if he had missed the point entirely. "That's not what this is about," she said. "You're mixing things up." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward or point a finger. He simply repeated the question. Why wasn't she invited? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, everything she had carefully avoided began to surface. "She wouldn't fit the atmosphere," she said finally. "It was supposed to be a certain image, a certain feeling." My father nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer all along. "So you erased her," he said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. "It wasn't erasing," my sister snapped. "It was a choice. It's my wedding." "Yes," he replied. "And she's my daughter." That was the moment things shifted. She accused him of choosing sides, of sabotaging her happiness, of caring more about my feelings than her future. She said he was punishing her over something small, something that shouldn't matter this much. He listened. Then he spoke. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "And it's not about sides. It's about boundaries." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You're overreacting." "No," he said calmly. "I'm reacting late." He told her what he had never said out loud before, that he had watched me step aside for years, that he had mistaken my silence for strength, my adaptability for consent, that by staying neutral, he had allowed imbalance to become normal. "I won't stand in a place where one of my children has to disappear so the other can shine," he said. She cried then. Not softly, not reflectively. She cried in frustration, in anger, in fear of losing control. She asked him if he expected her to fix everything now, if he wanted an apology, if he wanted her to invite me at the last minute and pretend nothing had happened. "No," he said. "I want you to understand why this happened." She didn't answer. When the conversation ended, nothing was resolved. The wedding wasn't cancelled, no demands were made, no ultimatums delivered. But the illusion my sister had lived inside collapsed completely. For the first time, she had to face a truth she could no longer curate. That family isn't something you edit for appearances, and that choices, especially quiet ones, carry consequences. When my father told me about the conversation, I didn't feel victorious. I felt something else. Relief. Because for once, the truth had been spoken out loud. And once that happens, nothing can go back to the way it was before. I didn't go to the wedding. On that day, I woke up early, made myself coffee, and sat by the window as the morning light slowly filled my apartment. There was no rush, no dress to put on, no place I was expected to prove I belonged. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. For years, I believed love meant endurance. that being family meant staying quiet, staying useful, staying small enough not to cause discomfort. I thought if I kept giving, eventually I would be chosen. But that day taught me something different. I didn't need to be present at a ceremony to know my worth. I didn't need a seat at a table where my absence had been carefully planned. What mattered was not where I stood, but who stood with me when it finally mattered. My father didn't fix everything. My sister didn't suddenly understand. Our family didn't transform overnight. But something fundamental changed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asked to disappear to keep the peace. I wasn't told to be patient, forgiving, or quiet. Someone saw the truth and chose not to look away. And that choice gave me permission to choose myself. I began setting boundaries without apologizing for them. I stopped explaining my absence. I stopped reaching for approval that had always come with conditions attached. I learned that love without respect is not love, it's obligation. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not too much. You are not selfish for wanting to be included. And you are not wrong for walking away from places that require you to shrink. Sometimes justice doesn't come with shouting or revenge. Sometimes it comes quietly when someone finally refuses to stand where harm is being normalized. If you've stayed with me until this moment, I want to speak to you not as a character in a story, but as a person who lived it. For a long time, I believed that being quiet made me strong. That swallowing my hurt made me mature. That love meant enduring whatever was handed to me, as long as it came from family. But this experience taught me something I wish I had learned sooner. Silence is not the same as peace, and sacrifice is not the same as love. If you see yourself in my story, if you've ever been the one who stayed behind, who adjusted, who was expected to understand while others were excused, I want you to know this: you are not weak for feeling hurt. You are not selfish for wanting to be included. And you are not wrong for setting boundaries, even when it's uncomfortable. Life doesn't always give us justice through loud victories. Sometimes, the most powerful change happens quietly, when we stop explaining ourselves to people who have already decided not to listen. When we choose dignity over approval. When we realize that being part of a family should never require erasing who we are. I would really love to hear from you. Do you think I did the right thing by staying away? What would you have done in my place? Your thoughts, your experiences, your advice might help someone else who is standing at the same crossroads I once faced. Please share your perspective in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if stories like this resonate with you, stories about family, boundaries, and quiet courage, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It helps these stories reach others who need to hear them. Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding. And most of all, thank you for being here.